without further ado, I will say welcome to everybody. My name is Aida Gregorian, and I am a co-director at the Young Women in Law. I am very pleased to have with me today Ms. Stacy Keehn and Haley Wong for this very anticipated event. So I am going to do a little short intro. What we are going to do today is go through a series of questions. Some of them were sent to us, and we're hoping to have an organic type of conversation, an honest conversation, a pragmatic one, and a positive one. And we're hoping to shed some light on some questions that junior lawyers might have today. So I'll introduce Stacy. So Stacy is a Queen's Law 2004 graduate, and she was called to the bar in 2005. Although she hails from the Maritimes, she relocated to Ottawa to article at a large local firm and quickly realized that practicing law wasn't quite her cup of tea, but living in the national capital was a perfect fit. So drawing on her Master's of Education in Counseling, she joined the Career Development Team at U Ottawa U Ottawa Law in 2005, and now has over 15 years experience working with students and young lawyers to develop their own career trajectories. So she had advice for her younger self. It would be to worry a little bit less and have the confidence that you have the skills to handle what life throws at you. Oh, and wear sunscreen, which I think is fantastic advice. And then we've got Haley Wong. Yeah, she's thumbs up to that. I think sunscreen is very important. So Haley is a Queen's Law graduate from 2015. She was called to the bar in 2016. She summered, articled, and was hired back into Aird Burles's commercial real estate group. Haley soon realized she wanted to play a more significant role in student development, so she made a strategic move to join a boutique executive recruitment agency where she learned how to recruit executives for Fortune 500 companies, law firms, and high-growth startup companies. Haley joined Norton Rose Fulbright as their student director in July of 2019 and has never been happier at work. Haley has spent the last 6 months of the pandemic debating whether to splurge on a purse or a Peloton. She went with the bike because Peloton allowed her to amortize and Balenciaga did not. That is very, very smart. I don't think that I would have the mental fortitude to make that choice, but I am happy that you did. That is our introduction of our panelists today. What I think we'll do is we'll go and dive into some of the questions that we have here. So essentially, we're dealing it with a situation where being a junior lawyer during the pandemic is probably, I think it's fair to say, is a little bit more challenging than it usually is. So it poses its, unique sets of challenges, but we also at the YWL think that it's important for us to always look for silver linings. And we have a community and a network of people, and we hope that with these types of events that we bring some kind of inspiration and networking opportunity, but also inspire people to see the positive in things. So we can dive in with perhaps the first question that we have, or what are some of the challenges facing young lawyers today? So I can ask either Haley or Stacy to jump in on that one.
Stacy, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I will definitely kick us off. So I would say that, in addition to all of the regular challenges that you would have being a junior lawyer or someone who's about to embark in the profession, it's all of the sort of the uncertainty, right? So it's the uncertainty with the legal market, it's the economic uncertainty, all of those things are definitely challenging. And I think that, for me, a really important message that I want to share with everyone is to say, like, the pandemic is going to affect everyone. It's going to affect everyone in different ways and at different times. So, you can go through a phase of a couple of days or a couple of weeks where you're like, I got this, and then something will happen and you're like, oh, I maybe don't got this in the same way that I thought I did. And I do just want to remind everyone that is completely normal. And to say that for those of you who are new to the profession now or about to join the profession, your trajectory is likely going to look different than those people who came before you. That's okay. None of this is your fault, right? Like it's just about acknowledging that there are challenges and being okay with the fact that your trajectory is going to look very different than the people who came before you. So that was sort of the thing that I wanted to kick us off with.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Stacy. And I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge it, right? Like to acknowledge that things are different. Saying that it's the same, some people say that as a coping mechanism. I personally am of the view that it's better to acknowledge that it's difficult, it's hard, there are obstacles and there are going to be difficulties, but if we acknowledge it, I can then find a plan of attack to deal with the issues at hand. So I think that's a great way to start us off. So I guess, one of the things that, junior lawyers are probably preoccupied with today is the recruiting process. Obviously, that has sort of changed in light of everything. So this is sort of a question that I think can be addressed by the both of you. So the question is, what does the recruiting process look like for students right now, and even for junior lawyers who are looking for work? Maybe Haley, if you wanted to answer that.
Sure. So it's, I'm sure everyone on the call, if you are sort of about to go through the process, you're a law student right now, you've already heard that the pandemic has pushed the sort of usual November timeline for recruitment to January. It's all very condensed and it's all virtual, which, obviously Stacy and I are thrilled about. But so, logistically and practically speaking, that is what's different. It's, all going to be virtual probably. I don't think that news has kind of broken yet. OCIs, we already know virtual, and we had said sort of early on that ideally by pushing into March, it gave students and schools and firms a couple benefits that we were hoping for. So at the end of last year, the last school year, a lot of the schools had to switch their grading schemes to pass-fail. So a lot of students don't really have grades to put on their application, unfortunately. And by pushing it to the next semester, there was a hope that there would be first semester grades coming in to supplement applications. And I think there was also this hope of what would March look like? Maybe we would be in person and we could do in-firms in person. And I don't think this is official yet, but I get the feeling from myself and counterparts in the street and our friends at CDOs as well, that no one thinks that an in-person in-firm week is going to happen, especially with now being in the second wave. So I think students are now looking at a completely virtual process. It's going to look very, very different than normal. I kind of doubt firms' abilities to do extracurricular, events as well. Something that's very common during the interview process is of course the dinners and the cocktail receptions and that kind of thing. I would be prepared for that not to happen either, which is also quite disappointing. So, from a practical standpoint, that's how things are looking.
Thanks. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
If I could just jump in quickly. So for those of you who are attending today who are like, I'm not a student, I'm an associate, or looking for associate positions, I think the important piece to draw out of this is that there is a shift in the recruiting for students. And so in terms of your own timing, when it comes to reaching out to employers, et cetera, just good for you to know that a lot of the recruitment a lot of the focus will be on the student recruitment programs sort of in January and February. So we also just wanted to highlight that for all of you.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and Haley as well. That's an excellent point. I guess the timing is an important thing to keep in mind if people are reaching out. So the student recruitment is for usually January, is it, Stacy?
So it's usually, the student recruitment usually for Toronto usually happens in the fall. And so everything's been pushed back into January and February.
Wonderful. that's good to keep in mind. And just to touch base on what Haley was talking about in terms of the extracurriculars, I'm going to do a shameless YWL plug and say that, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, it's very important to me personally, because I think it's good for everyone's mental health to stay connected. So please keep an eye out for any, you know, we have a number of events that we're going to be hosting. So even though you may not be able to do your extracurriculars through your firm, the YWL is aiming to have a bunch of events online, and so keep your eyes open for that. The next question that's sort of, you know, do you think that young lawyers are receiving the same level of training, given that most of it is now virtual? And do you foresee any unique challenges for their future or their careers? So I know that's a loaded question. So anyone is free to chime in if they want.
I can start us off.
Sure, thanks.
I'm fresh off a virtual summer program for our summer students. So, you know, my answer is sort of very reflective of the experience that we just had. Luckily, as I'm sure everyone knows as well, most of the Bay Street firms did go forward with virtual summer programs despite us not being able to be in person, and everyone kind of adapted very quickly. Our students were awesome and very positive despite the strange circumstances. We very quickly put together a very extensive, probably more hands-on than usual program than we would have in person. We put a lot of focus into things like how to internally business develop, how to build your profile, how to build those connections. And the reason for that being, you know, to answer the question specifically, I do think that we are able to offer a lot of the sort of substantive training virtually. You know, lawyers adapted to giving instruction, giving seminars over Zoom very quickly. But the one piece that is very difficult is the sort of social bonding piece. Our students typically were known for having like the student pit, which is all our students sit together in the summer, and they become incredibly, incredibly close to one another. And so we really tried to, we knew we couldn't recreate that. You know, students weren't able to just go for a drink together after work or hang out together in person as often, if at all. And so we had to put a lot of work and energy into building relationships. And I think that's still the piece that unfortunately you can't perfectly replicate in this world. I think we are very positive about it, and we did the best that we could. And I think our students built great relationships with each other and lawyers within the firm. But it's hard for anyone to be entering any workplace right now in this situation. It's equally hard for, you know, our lateral associates who we've hired during the pandemic. We have to put a lot more sort of concerted effort into helping them build those relationships. So I think the training is there, but the interpersonal social aspects, that's where there's really been an unfortunate sort of gap compared to where we would be normally.
Right.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I do think that having onboarded people during the pandemic, it requires so much more thought and so much more planning to onboard people in a good and a strategic and positive way during a time when everyone's working remotely than it does when you can just like pop into someone's office. So I think that, you know, employers who are committed to that and who are thinking about it are doing it well. Not necessarily perfectly, because we're all learning, right? Like nobody anticipated 2020. And I bet you if someone had asked us, we all would have said, no, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, next, like, let's just flip that slide. Let's go to something else. So I do think that there are probably employers who haven't figured it out yet, right? And so that's okay. So like, I think it's important to understand that your experience might not be uniform. And then one of the questions that we get a lot in the sort of the law school context is, you know, law school now looks different than it did in September of 2019, what is that going to mean for my career, right? Because I'm not learning in the same way as those who went before me did. And sort of my response to that is, I think we are going to start to see lots of changes in the legal profession. I think we're going to start to see changes faster than we've ever seen them before. When the Great Recession hit, sort of 2008, 2009, that was a catalyst for change in this incredibly slow moving profession. And in that, so in the last decade, I have seen more change in the legal profession than probably occurred in the previous 50 or 60 years. I think this is going to be an extra catalyst to change. I think that some of the benefits of being the people who are going through the change in this way, who are in the profession, is that you're learning when everybody else is learning. So I think there's a little bit of leeway there, right? Because everyone's learning at the same time. And for those of you who are in law school now, you are going to come out, I think, better equipped to deal with the changes that are happening in the legal profession, because you will have been learning as the changes are happening. So those are just some of the things that I thought I would add.
Oh, fantastic. And thank you to both of you. I think those are both excellent points. And I have to echo exactly, I totally agree with what you're saying, Stacy. Having, I was in law school in 2010 is when I had started. So just that iteration, it has changed dramatically. And I think, in some of our previous discussions, we talked about how the pandemic has probably just fast-tracked some of the changes that would have slowly happened, because we all know that the law does take its time to adapt. It's not the quickest profession to adapt to things like technology, et cetera. But there, as you said, in 2008, there was a shift. And I think that this could be seen as a positive because, there's a lot more, the concept of flexibility, the concept of working remotely, different types of roles as well in law, I think are going to come out. We're going to see that. Maybe hybrid types of roles are going to come out in the future. And then in terms of the training, I think that's a really good point that Haley made about there being, a framework. And also Stacy was talking about how it takes a lot more time to onboard somebody online. So for people who are, getting a job in this virtual environment, I think the positive of it is that you're getting perhaps hopefully clearer instructions, and also just more of a solid framework of where to work. Or sometimes, if you're in a firm, there might be that hesitancy to even walk into someone's office and ask them the question, whereas the anonymity of sending an email or sending a chat sometimes is a little bit easier than mustering up the courage for some to go and ask a question. So that's the flip side of it. So I think these are all interesting points to consider. It kind of ties in quite well into the next question, which is that law is typically considered a stable career. Do you foresee that changing? And do you foresee enrollment in law school being affected? So perhaps the first part of the question, maybe Haley, if you're comfortable to answer that, typically considered a stable career, and maybe Stacy can talk about enrollment in law school.
For sure. I saw this question come in on the chat, and I'm happy to sort of address it quickly as part of this answer. Yeah. So I know that I think a lot of articling students across the street in general are very concerned about what the pandemic means for higher back, obviously. And so I think that you can sort of be reassured looking at the numbers that came out for this year that just wrapped up in April, that, for the most part, every firm their numbers were very on par with a usual year at that firm. And I think that all firms in general have a strong commitment to understanding that our student program is a big part of our talent pipeline. And we've put a lot of work and a lot of effort into recruiting these students, training these students, and we want to retain good talent. And so I don't think that there will be great changes in that regard, just as we didn't see any great changes in April. For this question in particular, it relates to sort of building, the social relationships and the personal relationships with members of the firm. My advice to any articling student, and my advice to my own articling students every single day is you just have to put that effort in. You have to put that effort in to build your own profile internally, to, you know, foster those relationships. And if it helps, you know, remember that your whole articling class is in the same boat as you are. You know, you have the same resources as every other student in your year, the same like internal messaging system, email, video call, etc. And so use those things to your benefit. But at the end of the day, you know, beyond the social aspect is of course just the quality of work and the consistency of the work that you're doing. I think every recruiter will tell you that for hire back, that is the number one consideration. And that's still within your power to do just as good work as you would do in person. So, you know, keep your focus there. I understand articling is a very stressful time under normal circumstances, and this has made it even more stressful. But as it relates to things like numbers and hire back, I don't expect to see, you know, significant changes. And I think that, you know, in terms of if this is still like a stable career, I do think so. I think that, you know, this pandemic has actually raised a lot of new legal questions, and people are, you know, definitely always still going to need lawyers. There will still be those jobs there. And so you know, the short answer is I do think it is still in our world considered a stable career.
Thank you very much for that, Haley. And I think that it's great advice about, you know, using the technology and the communication tools that everybody else has available to them, and knowing that I think quality of work does take precedence over the social aspect. Social is important, but I think you're absolutely correct. Sometimes, you know, you get bogged down into the little nitty-gritty details, but as students and as associates, I think it's better to focus your energy on producing quality work and being responsive and being someone that can be trusted to carry a project through from beginning to end, as opposed to being, you know, the known to everybody. But because at the end of the day, if for whatever reason, and this goes to the person who asked the question, if for whatever reason you're not hired back, or the firm is not able to give you a job, I think it's more important to have somebody who can write a reference to speak to the quality of your work. So it's important to also maybe even look for some feedback as well. So that might be a way to create a rapport between your articling principal as maybe the next project that you have. Say, you know, if you have a few minutes, could you let me know how you think I did and what I can do next time to do better? So I think that might be something to consider. And the second part of the question, which is, do you foresee enrollment in law school being affected? So Stacy, I don't know if you have any insight on this. Obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but.
I was just going to say my crystal ball, I don't have it sitting with me on my desk, but what I can tell you is that during the recession, we saw an increase in applications to law schools.
Okay.
So I do not anticipate that in the immediate future, we are going to see a decrease in the number of applicants to law schools. I think what will be interesting to see is, you know, sort of 4 or 5 years out, because of decisions that current high school students are making about whether or not they're going to go and do an undergrad starting now, or if they're going to start later, or if delaying going to do a university degree means that they are going to embark on careers where they're more self-taught. So I think that where we're going to see the impact, if any, will be closer to 4 or 5 years from now, as opposed to in the immediate. And just a comment on the stability of of law as a career. I agree 100%. Like, I think there is stability there. This profession has been ripe for disruption for years. And so that I think we're going to see happen. I think that with, court shutting down and, things having to go on hiatus, that has really demonstrated that there are pieces of our justice system that are broken and that are fundamentally broken. And I think that's where opportunity comes in. And so that's where we're going to start to see innovation, and we're going to start to see how things can maybe be done differently. So I think that, yes, this is a stable career, but I think that our concept of what lawyers do and how they do it and where they do it is something that needs to change. Like Haley said, people are always going to need a lawyer for one reason or another. I think, though, the way that we approach the career and the way that we approach our work is something that's gonna change. And I wish I had the answer to tell you exactly how it's going to change, but the crystal ball and the magic wand are all in the shop at the moment. But I'm confident that there will be change.
Right, and I think that it's a good point to make about the the industry, our profession being ripe for disruption. I really like that you said that, and it's been that way for quite some time. So it's I think it was bound to happen whether the pandemic arrived or not. It just has happened in a very fast-tracked way. At least that's the way that I see it. And there are, I do believe there are going to be opportunities, because there are going to be so many different configurations in the future of how lawyers do work. I think there was a book when I was in law school that was, the title was something about I think the title was The End of Lawyers. I'm not sure if that was the title. And that was a book, I think, that was written maybe 15 years ago, maybe even more. And so that I think that title of that book shows that this was something that was foreseen by a lot of different people in various practice areas that saw that, law has to change from its traditional configuration, because the world is changing around us, technology is happening, and the needs of people are changing as well. So I think it's an excellent point, Stacy. Thank you so much. And I guess that also helps us to tie into a question that we have for Haley. And you might have a little bit of insight about this. What industries in law have been most affected, and how should students or young lawyers be mindful of this as they navigate their careers? Now, again, I appreciate that Haley doesn't have a crystal ball. At least I don't see one there. So she might not have one, but if you could take a stab at that and let us know, maybe share some of your insight or your thoughts.
Sure. I can't, again, opine too much on sort of how this will change in the future, but again, maybe this is like a tie-in to my previous answer and of interest to articling students or soon to be articling students in particular. We've seen significant changes in the types of practice groups and the types of matters that are coming up. So I think it's not a secret to say that in general, Canadian capital markets and probably capital markets globally and internationally are all seeing reduced activity. And so I think if you are super, super gung-ho on becoming like a securities lawyer right now, maybe give it some thought. Maybe see how much you like banking instead, because I do not have a crystal ball to say when our M&A activity is going to rebound to previous levels. And I think that is one of the most difficult sort of things for young lawyers and students to grapple with right now. I mean, I fully believe that one day our society will go back to closer to some semblance of normalcy, and that M&A activity will increase again. But in the short term, it's definitely the area that's taken the biggest hit. Business activity in general has taken a huge hit, with the exception of probably banking and insolvency matters. So we are predictably going to see a lot of companies deal with defaults and bankruptcy. And so a lot of firms, if you just go on LinkedIn, have made sort of strategic hires in their banking and insolvency groups in order to anticipate that work that is going to come as a result of the pandemic. So like I said, there is always still a need for a lawyer, just maybe not in the areas that you had thought. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the business realm, which is typically, the most sort of talked about common practice area. The other practice areas, though, they haven't really seen much of a change. Employment and labor, however, has seen a huge bump in activity.
Yes.
Lots of employers don't know what to do right now. The government rolls out, sometimes weekly, daily updates to their legislation, and then, the clients are calling us and we have to figure it out. And so E&L activity skyrocketed. So if that's what you're interested in right now, good for you. And then litigation and intellectual property, things like that, I think have seen sort of steady activity. Litigation took a little bit of a dip when the courts all closed, but now that they're reopening, people are adapting to virtual court and virtual hearings. We're seeing that activity go up again. And I think that the court system is not going to wait until we have a vaccine to move these matters along. They will all slowly adapt to going virtual. So it's great to see activity go back up there as well. So if you are, again, in the position of being an articling student, I would take that knowledge, I think, to think about expanding your horizons and keeping a more open mind in terms of what areas you are interested in practicing in the future. I don't know how long these changes are going to be in effect for.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
What I would add to that is, so let's say that you really wanted to be doing an area of law that's really slowed down right now, and you're like, maybe not the best strategic choice for me at the moment. I think that rather than saying, oh, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to do that, there's some important steps to go through, which are like, sit down and assess, why are you excited about that area? Have you talked to someone who works in that area and found out what's exciting to them? From their perspective, what are the key skills that you need to have to be successful? So once you have a picture of what a job might be like, or a particular practice area might be like, what you think might be exciting about it, and the skills that are really important, then even if that's not an area where there's a lot of activity right now, there's not a lot of hiring, then it gives you the opportunity to take a look at a different job. So banking or bankruptcy. Are there skills that you would gain in doing that type of work that when the market changes would allow you to transition into something that would be more exciting to you? So it's a lot about having, not knowing. I think saying knowing makes it sound like it's very concrete, but having an idea of where it is you want to go, exploring, asking people sort of what it takes to do well in that area. And then when other opportunities come your way, assessing them with a view to, okay, yeah, like I think I could do this. I think I would like it. And this is going to be a building block for me to get to the job that I'm really, really excited about. And that's, I think, one of the things that happens when there's a recession or there's disruption in the economy. It means that possibly the dream job, or, the thing that you're really excited about isn't necessarily going to be within reach right now, but that doesn't mean taking something that you hate. It doesn't mean taking something that's going to make you 100% miserable. If it's going to make you miserable and you hate it and you're not gaining skills to get you to where you want to go, then that's not the right decision, right? And I think this came up in a chat where people are concerned about, and rightly concerned, like, what do I do in this situation? Like, if I have a job offer and I think I'm going to be miserable, do I take it or not?
Right.
And it's about asking yourself those questions. Is it going to give me a skill that's going to be useful or not? How much time is the employer going to put into my training and development? So if they are taking you on because they know they have a short-term need, and you're like, I have a short-term need, so this is a really good short-term marriage for us, and we're both going to get skills and then we can part ways easily. That's a different scenario than someone who's like hiring you on and hoping that you're going to be there for 10 years.
Right.
And you're like, no, I'm just jumping in really quickly. So I think that piece can be really, really important when it comes to navigating your career in an uncertain time.
And thank you both for those excellent responses. And I think it's extremely important to also keep in mind that, notwithstanding the pandemic, I think that's excellent advice, Stacy, because a lot of times if I look back at some of my friends and also my own ideas coming out of law school, there's this concept of the linear path, right? Where, oh, I'm going to get an OCI. If I don't get an OCI, my life is over. And then if I had these ideas that I'm sure a lot of junior lawyers might have, about this linear path and, work and then become a junior partner and then maybe then become an equity partner and then maybe become, I don't know, just there's this linear path that we have, and it's part of the traditional model of law. And I learned very quickly that wasn't going to work for me. I knew it worked for some of my friends and my peers. And this, again, is notwithstanding the pandemic. And the only way that I believe that I was able to cope with that was to deal with the emotional bruising that I had from it, because my ego was extremely hurt and I felt totally defeated and depressed and all of those things, like, eating ice cream out of a tub and like, my life is over. Why did I go to law school? Like, what a waste. I'm not good at anything. I'm never gonna, make it. All of those self-pitying, frame of mind, which, you've got to feel sad and then you have to move on. So I think once you do that, like, mental work, that mental health work, which is an extremely important piece, then you realize that, hold on a second, that's not necessarily my fault, that the industry is changing. There are no linear paths. If there were very few people, I think, in the last 15 years who could benefit from this traditional linear path. So I think to echo what you're saying is that this is, it's a totally new world. And if you are not where you want to be, it's very important to assess your current positions as you said, building blocks and steps, and what are you going to get out of that. And the concept of transferable skills is advice that I give to a lot of junior lawyers that I mentor as well on the side. And they ask me, like, oh, when I'm doing this kind of law, how is that going to help me get into that kind of law? And I said, you're an educated person, you've got the skills and the education. A lot of these skills are transferable. So yes, it may not be in that particular area, but if you are working in litigation, those skills are transferable to a variety of different things. If you're doing employment and labor law, if you're doing family law, if you're doing personal injury law, if you're a personal injury lawyer, if you're doing insurance defense work, all of these things, if you've done a hearing in one area of the law, you will likely be able to figure it out, right? Like, of course, there are niches and there are professionals, but you have to trust in your instinct that you're able to learn how to do these things. That's what your training is for. So I went off on a bit of a tangent, so I apologize, ladies, but I just am very inspired by what the both of you are saying. So the next question is, actually, we do have a question, a few questions from that are coming in from the chat. So it's a follow-up question to Haley's answer. Given the reduced business and capital markets, do you have any suggestions for how young lawyers who only have experience in M&A and securities can position themselves for roles in other areas?
Sure. So I think, I don't know, from what perspective this question comes from. I think if you are still a student, like you're still a articling student, I encourage you to use this time to really try and, keep an open mind and try work in other areas that your firm has to offer. If this is maybe coming from a perspective of someone who is already an associate and already has M&A or securities experience under their belt, I think that, you can certainly do a good job of showing how that experience can lend itself to other areas, as Stacy said. So you have to do a bit of legwork for yourself to figure out how you're going to speak about your experiences, how you're going to, position your skill set as one that is relatable and useful to another area that you're interested in. But one thing I should say, I feel like I maybe started us off on a tangent that's a little bit negative in this regard. It's not that there's no M&A activity and that we're not hiring an M&A at all. It's just that the trend of business activity right now, that's where it's at.
Right.
I mean, hopefully we'll all rebound very quickly and we'll be hiring, M&A lawyers at the same capacity very soon. But there is still activity there. And if that's truly what you want to do, I'm not advising that you give that up right now. I think you should give yourself the best shot possible at what you truly want to do. But at the same time, my advice for junior lawyers and students in particular all the time is not to get so sucked into what you think you want to do so early on. And I find this happens a lot with students where I think it is because they're so preoccupied on higher back that they think that they have to tell you from the get-go, I'm into securities, I'm into M&A, so that everyone else knows it, because they think that's going to give them sort of the best step ahead to get hired back, when really I think that could be very harmful to you, your development, and the chances and the doors that you're opening for yourself. But if it's, different strokes for different folks, and you just gotta, as Stacy said, don't take something that you're gonna hate for no reason, but keep your mind open to other opportunities and think about how the experience that you've already had can be, useful to other areas as well, and try and position yourself that way.
That's an excellent answer.
This is sort of related, maybe not, but I feel like this is maybe a good opportunity to insert it, because I'm speaking to a group of women. Keep in mind that when a woman looks at a job description or looks at something, we will often not apply for it unless we can confidently do 95% of the work, 95 to 99% of the work. That's a very sort of gendered way that we look at jobs and opportunities. It is not the case with our male colleagues. For them, it's somewhere between 40 and 60%. And that was something that was really highlighted for me early in my career. And it had to do with media training and female faculty saying, being asked for an interview. And this woman is an expert in her field. And she was like, oh, no, I don't think so. I think maybe you should talk to a colleague. And then the professor in the office next door, who doesn't even teach in the area, pops into her office and says, yeah, I've got this interview with this media outlet on this subject. What can you tell me about it? So that I can go and take this interview, right? And so I just share that with you to sort of illustrate, you don't have to be able to do 95 to 99% of the job on the job description in order to be successful. And so that is sort of when we're talking about transitions and pivoting. And so keep that in mind. And I can't remember if it was Aida or Haley that had said, have the confidence that you have the skill to figure it out. You made it through law school. That is a lot of skill, and it's not just the skill of reading cases and being able to write exams. It's being able to prioritize, to assess. And, I think too, really, really key in all of this is knowing when something exceeds your abilities, and be that in work, be it in your personal life, and being able to ask for help. That's the really important piece as well.
I think that's an excellent point. It's also knowing, I think there's a quote that I'm going to butcher, as I always do, but there's a quote is, you know what you know, but you should also know what you don't know. Go something along those lines. But essentially, I think a lot of young students or young lawyers are very keen to just say, yes, I'll do this work. I can do it. I can take this on. And then sort of freeze up and realize that, oh man, this is beyond the scope of what I thought I knew how to do. And now I'm going to look silly if I ask the question. And then they freeze up. And then there's this anxiety that is created. So I think it's important to absolutely, ask the questions, ask for guidance, ask intelligent questions, do some research beforehand. I think that's also very important in any job that you're in, whether it's in law or not. There are no stupid questions, but I think that there are also questions that can be easily answered if you did a little bit of research. So if you are going to be asking, a partner or anyone a question, I think it's always good to go prepared to show that you've made the effort to do some research, or maybe you're just asking for some clarity or some nuance. But that's just something that just came to mind with what you were saying. So we also have a few other questions in our chat. So this is on fire. Okay, so we've got. So how long should a junior stay in a role before switching? So I'm assuming they mean from a different practice area. For example, if they want to try out corporate law, but then switch to litigation or vice versa. So I think that is a difficult question to answer. I think it would really depend on, where you're at right now. And I don't know if any of you ladies want to take a stab at this one.
The specific example you gave is a difficult one to do, but it's not impossible. Actually,
Right.
At Norton Rose Fulbright, we do have an example of someone who was in litigation and then switched to corporate, albeit like a little similar. So was in litigation and then went to insolvency, which does have an advocacy aspect there. But I think if you know you want to do it, you should do it as soon as possible. There isn't really necessarily a ton of benefit in staying in such different practice areas. Like for the specific example of litigation and corporate, like that's almost as different as it gets. So I don't think there necessarily, unfortunately, is a ton of like, as Stacy said, like learning that you do in one area that's super, super relevant to the other. Of course, if you're going to do like commercial litigation, it's very good to know what's happening in the deal as well. But they are quite different skill sets from a basic level that we're looking at. If you're thinking about sort of transitioning within business groups, let's say, like going from one area, like from securities to financial services or something like that, that's probably more easily done. And then probably within advocacy groups as well, that's more easily done. So for example, like again, using a Norton Rose Fulbright example, we do have one of our employment and labor lawyers before joining us had sort of a general litigation practice as opposed to specifically doing E&L. But I think if you do already know for yourself, you want to make that switch and it's such a drastic one, I would recommend trying to do it sooner rather than later.
I think that's an excellent answer. And I also believe that it's important to have, if you have a healthy appetite or curiosity about something, to kind of tie into what Stacy was saying before, is to really figure out, why are you excited about this other area? Is it because you hate securities or just want to dabble in litigation, or is it because litigation has always been what you wanted, but you got a job in security? So I think these are all very personal questions that people have to ask themselves. And then also, I think, really going out there and speaking to actual people who are out there in the trenches doing that kind of work to tell you exactly, what to expect and what are the skills required. So if you feel that you can make that transition, I think it's a very good idea to do it, as Haley said, as early as possible. We've got another question as well. So a question, this is a great question. I think we also talked a little bit about this in our event in the summer, which was a Life After Hire Back. It says, when a job says 2 to 5 years experience, but you're a new call, so I'm assuming, 2020 or 2019, should we still be applying? So far, that hasn't resulted in any responses when applying to those jobs. I think that's an excellent question. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I'm also happy to have Haley contradict me 100%.
Sure.
So my mentor when I was an articling student, so in the, the dawn before time or whatever, she said I would apply for anything that said like 2 to 5 years. She was like, apply for it. And she said, I'm a shining example. She said, I just happened to have experience in the area that they were looking for. And the other people who applied for the job didn't have that experience. So they were more senior and they had transferable skills, but they were really looking for someone who had subject matter knowledge. And so if there had been even one other person in the pool who had the subject matter knowledge, I wouldn't have even made it to the interview stage. But because you don't know who else is applying, I think that when you're applying for a job that says like 2 to 5 years experience, you do it with your eyes wide open. And so I know that it's discouraging that you haven't gotten any callbacks from that so far. But the thing is you never know. When I applied for my position at the University of Ottawa, they were looking for someone who had 2 to 5 years experience. I didn't have it. So I was like, well, I'm in, the way that I made the decision was I'm interested in this job. I think I would really like it. I think that I could contribute something. So I'm going to put my application in and sort of see where it goes. So I think that you do it, but you do it with your eyes wide open. And then, understand that someone may look at it and be like, that's not what I'm looking for. Although this might be more relevant to sort of law related jobs as opposed to someone who's looking for a counsel who works in this area, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes when you're the hiring manager, you think you know what you're looking for, but at the end of the day, you actually don't. Like there's just someone who comes out of the pile who has this really interesting combination of skills where you're like, oh my God, like that is my dream person. We have to hire them. And it could be the person who has 2 years experience versus there could be someone in the pile who has 10 years experience. And you're like, I know that's what we asked for, but I don't think that that's going to work. And so, that is sort of my advice, but to do it, and I know it's hard, right? It's hard to like submit the applications and not get a response, submit an application, not get a response. I just think you sort of do it with your eyes wide open. And then if there's something that you're really, really excited about, then you go the extra steps, right? You reach out to somebody. What is it that they're really looking for, et cetera. You try to build those connections. You can't do that. Like if you are applying to jobs regularly, you can't do that for every application you're going to submit. You will be exhausted. And you can't have that expectation of yourself. So you have to be able to assess positions and be like, oh, these are the ones I'm really excited about. These are the ones I'm excited about. These are the ones that I'm marginally excited about. These are the ones that I'm just throwing my application in because we're going to see what happens.
I think that's excellent advice, Stacy. I think that's fantastic. I during our Life After Hire Back event, we had a career coach and we also had a recruiter there, and they sort of, some of them had different opinions about the years that's posted on the experience, but so the career coach, if my memory serves me correctly, indicated that, sometimes it's not a bad idea, as you said, to put your name out there because you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And you never know, as you said, what's going on the other side, what the pool of applicants are, what's the landscape over there, what business decisions are being made, and what their needs are. And then, the other side of it is that, if they're looking, the worst thing that can happen is that you don't get a response. I think that's maybe one way to look at it. But if you are going to be applying for positions where they are saying that you require a certain amount of years of experience, my rule of thumb is to always sort of mitigate that if it's absent from my application in any way, to kind of showcase something else. I might not say like, I don't have the experience or I don't have the 5-year requirement or whatever it is, but I will really try to, if it's something I'm truly excited about, as you said, really try to tailor your cover letter to include something to mitigate the fact that you don't have that, 4 years experience, and that really makes you an interesting candidate. But as Stacy said, you can only do that for jobs that you're truly interested in, because otherwise it is exhausting, and I speak from experience. I know. Haley, I was wondering if maybe you have a completely opposite view, and that's totally okay, because we like to have opposite opinions here. It's something for everybody.
I don't have an opposite opinion per se, but I think Stacy said it exactly right, and that you are doing it eyes wide open. I think if if you're a new call, like you're a 2020 call, there's an added layer there as opposed to being, let's say, like a second year, but they're asking for a fifth year. If you're a second year and they're asking for a fifth year, 100% like you should apply, as Stacy said, because you never know what might happen. Like there may be no fifth years that they are interested in, or something like that. But if you're a first year call, it is very, very, very difficult. And I'm not saying don't apply, but I'm saying, of course, apply with the understanding that unfortunately you may not have the experience that they are looking for. And the reason for that being, first of all, you have not practiced yet. And the second reason being that unfortunately, like there are a lot of other first year calls who are applying at the same time. So it's harder for you to differentiate yourself as well in that regard. And that's okay. And then that's when you should really make if it is something you're truly very interested in, make all the efforts, as Stacy just said. And I understand it is very challenging to have to go through that process, but like if a really amazing application crosses our desks and unfortunately it's not the right fit right now, but you can get in to speak to someone, you'll be remembered for if a need comes up later. So you have to do a lot of legwork for the one opportunity that is going to work out, unfortunately. But my advice still is to apply.
I think that's great advice, and some really good points to consider. We have a question here that I was wondering if it's normal or abnormal to have billable hours in litigation associate position. I'm a new call and the firm I'm interested in never mentioned billable goals, so I'm a little confused about what's the norm. So I might try to answer that only because I did do some litigation before. I guess at first, I'm not sure whether or not you're working there or are going to work there. It sounds, one thing that I will say is that depending on the firm, people have different metrics and different requirements. So I would definitely ask for clarity. There are billable hours in most litigation practices. Some smaller firms don't do a billable hour. Some in-house departments don't do a billable hour. But that's definitely something that you would want to clarify because you want to know what are your expectations. So if you are getting into a role, it's an excellent question because I think it's something that a lot of people are maybe too shy. Like we're very gung-ho if you get a position and you're just excited and you forget to maybe ask some of the details, and then maybe a month and a half into it, you're kind of like in hot water because you weren't clear as to what the expectations were. So I think it's very important as well if you've been given an offer or if you're considering to apply to this litigation associate position, that you get some clarity as to exactly what's the target. Is it a hard target? Is it a soft target? Are there things, are there times in the year where what is the firm's fiscal year as well? That's something that I think is very important to keep in mind. Not all firms operate the same way. So that means that, maybe also you want to clarify and confirm that if you start on a certain day that your hours are going to be prorated for the year. That's something that I know, like I had some friends who started and they didn't clarify that and it was kind of an issue later on. So what that means is that if, the target is, let's pretend 1,000 hours, probably way more than that. But let's pretend it's 1,000 hours in a year and you start 6 months into the fiscal year, expectation may be that you still do those 1,000 hours in the next 6 months. So if you don't clarify those things with your principal or the hiring manager at the very beginning, it can, just save yourself the headache and ask the question. I don't know if I've answered that properly. Maybe Haley or Stacy want to jump in about billable hours, but that's been my experience.
I think the norm is if you are working at a firm, there is a billable target, whether or not it's communicated to you, like the firm is a business and there is an expectation of what you are billing, what the goal means or doesn't mean. Like at some firms, meeting target means a bonus or not. Or something like that, right? But that's variable between firms. But, the short answer is yes, that is the norm.
Okay, great. So I hope that answers that. Let's see. So I think we'll go back to some of our questions. So we talked a little bit about networking. So I guess, yeah, we did talk about this, but I think it's worth kind of diving into. Obviously, we know that networking is important. We talked about that, and it's much more difficult. Do any of you have any suggestions about how students and lawyers can go about networking in a virtual world? So it is difficult, but I think there are ways to do it. So maybe I'll ask Haley if you have any suggestions, and then Stacy, and then I'll throw in what I've been doing to keep kind of sane through all of this.
So for me, most of the time, the people who are reaching out to me are law students who are about to go through the formal 2L recruit.
Right.
So I get a lot of those kinds of reach outs and calls. I had sort of in like the new virtual reality, the best one I've ever had a little while ago. I just thought this student did everything perfectly. I don't think she's like here, or else I'd give her a shout out. But she took the effort to specifically ask me for a virtual coffee chat. Like, she didn't just settle for a call. She specifically asked me to do a video call. And I thought that was a great way for us to connect. She presented herself so well, and she was so clear in her objectives for the call. She started the call too with giving me an introduction of herself, and it wasn't like a long-winded introduction. It was simply like, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm a 2L at Osgood, and I'm really interested in Norton Rose Fulbright because of X. I have some questions for you that I'm really hoping that you don't mind taking the time to answer. It was the first time anyone has ever done that, and I was blown away. And it was so simple. So I'd highly recommend everyone do that in any sort of like informational interview that you are going for in the future. And she had laid out her questions specifically. It kept us on track. We didn't waste a lot of time going on tangents that she wasn't necessarily interested in. And I think you really want to be aware that when you are reaching out to people to have these types of interactions, it makes a huge difference. And now this student is basically so on my radar for the upcoming recruit that I'm going to be upset if we don't end up with her. So I think that, put yourself in the best light possible, prepare for these things. They're not just an excuse for you to, spend some time talking about anything and everything with someone from an employer that you're really interested in. So
excellent advice. Excellent advice. Stacy, did you want to comment on this?
Sure. I think that one of the things with lawyers and law students is in some cases we seem to want to do networking, particularly if we're in a job. We want to do networking like in secret, so that because it says something about us that we're either not happy in our job, or we might be looking for other opportunities or whatever. And that makes it really hard to network. So it's about being willing and being strategic, right? But being willing to share with people and people you trust, to say like, hey, I might be looking for other opportunities, or I'm looking for opportunities to meet with, because I think still in this virtual environment, people are still looking to hire good people. And I can tell you, as someone who does a whole bunch of HR, if someone connects me with someone who's wonderful, oh my goodness, right? Like, that just makes the hiring process so much easier, even though that there's rules and structures that I have to follow. But that comes from that willingness to share. And I also notice it a lot with students who have just finished articles and who are called, and it's the start of the conversation sometimes is like, well, I didn't get hired back, and so I'm looking. And like, don't apologize for that, right? Like, I think that's the piece that's really important. And you change the tone by saying, you know, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm looking for. Oh, it would be great to chat with you. I'm 100% on board. And I can't believe, Haley, more students haven't done what you just described, because I tell you, we've been telling them to do it since March. You know, now Haley's going to get inundated with
Coffee dates.
requests, with coffee dates and stuff. And I do think that you can make connections, you know, through video and through phone. And in some ways, I think it's a little bit easier, because when someone used to call me and say, like, can we meet? I'd be like, okay, so I have to fit it into my schedule and factor in time to get from point A to point B, wait in line to get a coffee, find a spot, have the chat, have the time to get back to where it is that I'm going. Whereas now I can actually go from one thing right into the next in video. So, which, it's its positives and its negatives. So I'm not touting this as like the magic solution, but when it comes to networking, I think that people who have the time, it can be easier to fit it into the schedule. But I think that you want to be really precise about what it is that you're looking for, right? So I'm hoping to chat with you. This is how much time I'd like to chat with you for. And then you have to sort of guide that conversation. And then just being willing to share with people that you're looking to meet new people, because that's all that networking is, right? Is meeting new people, finding out what they do, figuring out if it's something that's interesting to you.
I think those are both very excellent answers and like really great nuggets of wisdom. I absolutely love the idea of the virtual coffee shop chat. I've had a few of them with some students who've reached out to me, and I find that the ones that went the smoothest and where I felt that I could be of better service to them are the ones where they came prepared. So I think a takeaway from this is go in prepared, don't go in blind like a blind date. Like, you should know what the person who you're meeting and be very strategic about who you're meeting. So don't just set up like 20 coffee dates, I think, with people. Really do some research, take some time to really scour LinkedIn, scour, you know, what's going on the firm websites, figure out what the person does, and if it's in alignment with what you're interested in, and then have maybe one or two very specific questions for that person. Because if somebody just shows up and says, hey, let's have a coffee, whether it's virtual or not, and they kind of come in and say, like, tell me what to do, I always am at a loss, because I'm like, oh man, I don't know where to start, right? So you want to sort of make it easier on the person who you're asking to take time out of their day to guide you. Because I think in this profession, there are a lot of people who are actually quite willing. There is this misconception that, you know, there aren't. And I think that there are a lot of people that are quite willing to take the time out of their day to share, help, and, you know, pay it forward. But they do, I think they need I think it's a two-way street, and it requires the person asking for help to do the research, know their stuff, come prepared. I think that's important. And to Stacy's point, I agree about it perhaps being a lot easier now, because when I was asking to meet with people before, when I was a student, it was difficult because they, you know, are like, oh, I'm in court or I'm in this meeting. And then I felt like I'm rushing them, and I felt even worse because I'm pulling them out of whatever situation. Whereas here, you know, in these circumstances, it might be a little bit easier to get that person to actually carve out the time for you. But do know that, you know, as you know, lawyers are busy. And so if you respect that person's time, come prepared. And you're probably more likely to get more out of it too, because you're not going in blind. But I think that's wonderful, wonderful advice to have clear objectives. And, you know, why am I meeting this person? Am I just meeting this person because I need a job? That's not very helpful. I think, you know, if I wanted to set up a call with Stacy or with Haley, there would have to be very specific questions that I wanted to ask, and I would definitely do some research beforehand. So that's about networking. And then I said I would tell you guys what I've been doing. So I've become a little bit more active on LinkedIn. I didn't really use LinkedIn before, quite frankly, and I find that there's a lot. So of course you have to sort of be careful not to be like overwhelmed with everything that's out there. But I think if you curate the companies and people that you follow or connect with, you're going to get more relevant information or opportunities come up for you. So I think that's extremely important to do, is to be active on LinkedIn is one of the ways that I've reached out and made some connections during the pandemic. And then of course, if I do have any colleagues that, we sometimes also have, a coffee date or a wine date, virtually, which I'm sure most of you have already been doing. That's sort of what I've been doing. Stacy, this is a question for you. What is the most effective way to go about looking for opportunities right now? So we might have already kind of covered this. LinkedIn is probably one way.
Yeah, so I and you guys are going to hate me for this answer. I don't think that anything has really changed on that front, because the most effective way to engage in a job search is to talk to people and to network, do informational interviews, and that hasn't changed. And I understand why we're drawn to the idea of putting in an application, right? So you see a posting, so they're hiring, right? So that there's an opportunity there, and you just want to put that application in. My statistic is a little bit out of date, but on average, if for every 100 applications you submit, it results in one job. For every 12 informational interviews you do, it results in a job. So, when you're weighing in the amount of time, the word of mouth and the connecting with people has always been the best sort of way to look for a job, and the most active way to look for a job. To me, applying to postings is a very passive job search. And so it's doing that connecting. I think, Ida, you also hit it on the head when you said, like, looking at LinkedIn, thinking about, like, are there interest groups out there who have a social media presence that share opportunities? So, like, I know there are some groups on Twitter where they'll be like, hey, did you know that, this group is hiring, or whatever. And, as someone who posts opportunities, because, like, I say it's a passive way, but we post, is a lot of those things that are circulating on Twitter or on social media or whatever the case may be, they never make their way to me as, like, an official posting. It just treats social media as another sort of word of mouth piece.
Right.
And I wish I had a better answer, but, like, that, it hasn't.
No, that's fantastic. That's good. It's good to know that, there is some constants, that haven't changed, right? So that's actually positive. There is a very interesting question, I guess, that touches upon some of the stuff that we were talking about before, about virtual coffee chats or informational interviews, which I love. I love that idea. It's something that I never did when I may have done it a little bit more informally, but I never actually took the time to do informational interviews when I was going through the process. And I think that is something that would be very helpful. So a question we have from one of our participants is, what kind of questions are employers tired of answering, and what kind of questions should we avoid asking when networking or during an interview?
I think I speak for all recruiters when I say we're tired of answering whether we have a rotational summer program or not.
Okay, good to know.
In general, though, I think if you ask me anything that you could have just read on the website, I know that you didn't do your research. And not only am I tired of answering those questions, it's very clear to me that you're not actually that interested in Norton Rose Fulbright if you couldn't do the bare minimum to look at the website. And so that's very, it's a really bad look, I guess, is how I would say that. So those are the kinds of questions that I would avoid. I think, unfortunately, as part of our roles, is we do get a lot of similar questions just because of the volume of students that we speak to. And there are lots of questions that I'm perfectly fine to answer because they're not very obvious, even if I have answered them several times. But it's more so if you're asking me something that I really think you probably could have found out a different way, and that you didn't need to speak to me to find out the answer to.
That's an excellent point. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about, preparation. is asking questions that if you can find the answer somewhere else, it's probably best not to ask that question. So that's good. Stacy, do you have any questions that you think are perhaps that people can avoid or?
So I think that one that I hear a lot, both that gets asked to me if people are doing informational interviews with me, and I'll hear them ask it to lawyers as well. And we tend to be really good at just reformulating the question and giving you an answer, is sometimes what's a typical day? And in some professions, you can ask people what's a typical day. So my partner is a tech person. He's a developer. When he was doing like coding, I could ask him what his typical day was, because whether it was what time of year it was or anything, his day was exactly the same. Now he shifted industries, and I can't ask him what a typical day is like because it's always different. And I think that happens a lot with lawyers too, is like, it depends. And oftentimes if you say like, what's a typical day like, we'll switch it. We'll say like, let me tell you what I did this week, or let me tell you what this week looked like, or let me tell you what. So I think maybe just reformulating that question a little bit also demonstrates that you have knowledge of what people are doing, in the sense that there's not a lot of typical days necessarily in a given practice area.
Excellent. I've got another interesting question that I missed earlier. So this one is a little bit, we're kind of switching gears, but I'm mindful of the time, but I do want to answer this question because it's interesting. So I just finished articling in June. I passed the solicitor exam and failed the barrister exam for the second time. I'm currently doing my LLM, but I really did not expect to fail the barrister exam again. I'm still not sure if practicing law is for me. I do miss doing some stuff that I was when I was articling, but right now it seems pretty impossible to study for the barrister exam, which I'll be rewriting on November 7th, and keeping up with my master's. Confidence is something I've always struggled with. I got a job offer from a firm to work part-time while doing my master's, but I had to tell them that I failed the barrister exam. So now I kind of feel like no one's going to take a shot on me. With the pandemic, it's a lot harder to have a schedule and create the balance of master's work and bar exam studying, and just get out of my head about this one exam literally being the only thing in the way of me getting licensed. Any advice about creating a schedule to succeed this third time mid-pandemic? So before I throw that question out there, I am going to be super candid. So this was an anonymous attendee. I was in the same position. So I failed the solicitor's exam, not the barrister's exam, and I was gutted. Like, my life was over, basically. And I still remember like the, very embarrassing emotional breakdown I had on my driveway. My neighbors might have thought that I was nuts. So I just want to maybe say that failing the bar exam is a lot more common than people make it out to be. I know a lot of people who failed the bar exam who are partners or assistant vice presidents in financial companies who own their own law firms right now. And I think that this, it's unfortunate and it sucks when it happens, but it is extremely important to keep in mind that, things are not always going to be linear. So the advice that I would give, and I'm going to defer to the experts here, but the advice that I would give, just because I was in this situation, is to, try your best to focus, but also keep an open mind that, you're doing the best you can given the circumstances. And you also do have your master's, which is a lot, it's a lot to juggle. So sometimes it also is a way for us to reevaluate if we have too much on our plate. Sometimes that's also a thing, there could be a number of reasons why, it's more difficult. But of course the pandemic is a stressor, and I think everybody has to be kind to themselves, kinder. So do not beat yourself up. If, failure is part of the game, I think, in any profession, in the law, for junior or senior, it happens. So I think that the number one thing I will say is, please do not despair, because it is more common than possible. Now, in terms of advice, in terms of creating a schedule, that's going to be a little bit tricky, because obviously it's going to depend on your other work with the master stuff. So maybe I'll stop there and see if maybe Stacy or Haley want to jump in.
Haley, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or?
I'll be really quick. I'll just say that I echo that. I think we in the profession do understand that sometimes people just fail the bar and it's a total fluke. And there's tons of examples of associates who are hired back who did have to rewrite one of the exams, and they even rewrote it while articling, which is really tough as well. So I don't, I hope that, you know, that doesn't deter you from taking this other opportunity if it is on the table for you, and pursuing others as well. But in terms of, you know, setting a schedule, I think that's very personal, and you have to decide what works for you and what your capacity limits are, and how to navigate that.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that we got a really good piece there, which is sort of evaluating what's on your plate. And so, you know, I would be asking, is it critical that I write in November? Should my focus be on rewriting the bar exam? Is that something I can put on hold? Or should my focus be on my studies? You know, because we only have so many hours in the day, and there's only so many pieces of ourselves that we can give. And, you know, you have the best sense of what your current situation is. And when it comes to setting a schedule, it's about, and I hate saying this, but it's about what works for you. And it's about playing with it a little bit. And, you know, like sometimes you'll get into a really, really good rhythm and a really good groove, and you're like, I've got this. And then after 6 months, you sort of fall off the wagon and you're like, oh, I don't got this anymore. And then it's thinking about what the right schedule is for you. So if it's, you know, setting in, doing like scheduling your time and having breaks, or like having big chunks, and it depends on how you learn and how you study, and when you have the most energy and when you don't have the most energy. But the other thing that I would say is that when it comes to setting yourself a schedule, is don't be so rigid that you don't give yourself any flexibility. And I really want to encourage people to, you know, we say schedule so you can be productive and you can get things done or whatever. But if you don't get everything done, that's not a failure, right? And I think that as women, and I think that as women who have gone to law school, and as women who are engaged in this profession, we sometimes look at things very black and white. And so you either succeed or you fail. And we do that across our lives. And so setting a schedule and having it not work, it's a learning opportunity. It means that the schedule doesn't work, let's try something else. And so it's sort of, it is getting into that mindset, and understanding that at certain times, even within a single month, like you may find that, you know, you're super productive in this time frame and then less productive in other time frames, and just allowing for that flexibility.
Excellent. I think that's some great answer to that. So I am mindful of the time, so I'm going to try and get to as many of these questions as possible. Maybe we can do one or two more of these questions that we had, and then so we have sort of weaved in a lot of the different types of we've weaved in a lot of answers, so this is good. So we did actually cover most of what we wanted to cover today. This is an interesting one. Are there general guidelines for Zoom etiquette or Zoom job interviews? Anybody want to take a stab?
I'm happy to take a stab at this, because we've been talking about it for a little while. I know that one of these questions came up, and students have been asking us, like, is it okay to wear headphones? Is it okay to wear iPods? Is it, or iPods? Yes, you're going to stick iPods in your ears. AirPods, or a headset, or something along those lines in an interview. And yes, because most importantly, you want to be able to hear and be heard. So you need to sort of get that set up working for you. And then it's stuff like, you know, camera angles and lighting, and, you know, doing that kind of stuff. And it's setting yourself up in the best possible situation that you can set yourself up in. It's not about being perfect. It is like I cannot believe that my cat hasn't made an appearance in our call today. That was just luck. It wasn't by design. And so I think that, you know, some of those things are really important. And then just being able to recover when things don't go particularly well. So if your cat walks through, or like someone streaks through the background of your video, or you get distracted, I think, you know, just being able to recover. And then really, for me, really, really important is the technology. And so knowing the platform that you're going to be using, knowing what the backup plan is. So like if your audio is not working, can you call in, making sure your cell phone is charged in case that happens, you know, having your computer plugged in so it doesn't die. You know, I'm a little bit of a nervous Nelly when it comes to technology. So I am in a position where I have a backup computer that's ancient, but at least it's around. Just sort of those types of things, I would say. And then also remembering that you're still trying to make eye contact, and you know, connecting with the person who's on the other side of the screen.
Well,
like 2 minutes or less. Those are my tips.
Those are excellent tips. Haley, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think I kind of touched on this earlier when I talked about like how impressed I was with that one student,
Yeah.
but all of those things.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's absolutely true. I think also running a test run of this, like even for our event today, we ran, you know, a test yesterday. I just moved right now because my computer was dying. So that I should have charged it more. So putting yourself in the best light, literally and figuratively, testing those things, having a friend maybe do a mock Zoom interview with you. I think that's one way. I remember when I was in law school, my friends and I would practice questions in person. Because of the pandemic, you know, I think it's a great opportunity for everybody to practice Zoom. Zoom is a skill now, and it's a bit of an art as well. And if you know, you're only going to get more comfortable with it the more you do it. So I think it's good to do a practice run with your computer and have backups, and be prepared for things to go wrong. And audio and audio is very important. So if your computer for whatever reason is not the greatest, perhaps you might want to invest in better, you know, a microphone or something like that. So you'll only know if you test it. So practice and come prepared. So I'm mindful of the time. It's already 1:29. I cannot believe how fast that went. I am going to say a huge thank you to Stacy and to Haley for carving out time out of their very busy schedules to be with us today. We are so appreciative of all of the wonderful nuggets of wisdom that we've had here. And this is I feel very inspired and supported. And I know that I'm going to take a lot of the advice that we talked about here and apply it to my own pursuits. I just wanted to also do a plug for my co-director, Kim Asnani, is going to be hosting an event next week. So as a follow-up to today's event, which obviously focused on the struggles that the pandemic poses to junior lawyers, we're going to be hosting a special panel next week to discuss how quarantine is making some of us, namely mid and senior level lawyers, question our careers. So the event is going to be Wednesday, October 7th, and it's going to be in the evening, so from 6 to 8, to discuss how to navigate big career changes within a shifting market. So we're going to be answering questions including how to know when it's right to make a move and how to facilitate that move in a virtual world. Just as this event, the event is going to be free, and you can register on our website. Feel free to send in your questions to our Instagram DMs, or you can email us at info@youngwomeninlaw. So that's our plug for next week's event, and we just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day. We hope that this was helpful. Please send us your feedback. And if we didn't get to some of your questions, please send us those as well, because we might be able to, you know, have a Q&A list of answers on LinkedIn or something. So thank you so much for everybody who attended. And again, huge thank you to Stacy and to Haley. We do hope to see our participants again on October 7th. And we will also be having a speed mentoring event later on in the month of October. So that's something that you might want to all keep an eye open for as well. So we are doing it virtual this year. despite pandemic, we're still going to do it. That's going to take some technological tries and maybe some fails, but we're going to prepare. We're going to do that. So thank you again for everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. So I don't know if